Most of us think of finance as, well, lending money to make more money. Pretty simple. But what if a whole global financial system was built on a totally different idea? Today, we're diving into the building blocks of Islamic finance, a world of contracts that are designed to fund everything from your car to massive skyscrapers, all without charging a single penny of interest.
So yeah, that brings us right to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? How on earth do you run a financial system with mortgages, business loans, all of it, without the one thing that drives conventional banking, interest? I mean, at first glance, it sounds kind of impossible, right? It's a system that just plays by a completely different set of rules.
And the answer forces you to completely shift how you think about finance. In this world, finance isn't about money just magically creating more money. Nope, it's all about facilitating the trade of things, actual real goods and services. The whole focus moves away from lending debt and zooms in on trading tangible assets.
Okay, so before we can even get into all the different financial tools, we have to get our heads around the one foundational rule that shapes everything. This one principle, really, it's the key that unlocks the entire system.
This single line is the absolute bedrock of Islamic finance. It draws a really clear line in the sand. Trade, a productive activity that creates real value, that's good to go. But riba, which is interest, is not. And that distinction forces the entire system to figure out, okay, how do we finance things using the rules of legitimate trade?
So if interest is off the table, what do you use instead? Well, the answer is this really sophisticated set of contracts, where each one is designed for a very specific job. Think of it like a toolkit. So let's open it up and see what's inside.
Now, I know, at first glance, this chart looks like a lot. But stick with that toolbox analogy. You've got different trays for different jobs, right? You've got your exchange contracts for buying and selling, partnership contracts for when you want to go into business with someone, and even charity contracts. It's a surprisingly comprehensive system.
For this explainer, we're going to zoom in on just one of those categories, exchange contracts. Honestly, you can think of these as the real workhorses of Islamic finance. They're the tools you use for all the everyday buying and selling of goods and assets. All right, let's get practical. Let's talk about the most common type of financing. How would you actually use the system to, say, buy a new car? Or maybe get funding for some equipment for your business? The main tool for that job is called murabaha. It's basically a cost-plus-profit sale. But, and this is a big but, the whole thing hangs on one absolutely critical, non-negotiable rule. And this, right here, is the game changer. In a normal loan, everything is about the interest rate, but here, everything revolves around transparency. The bank or financier has to tell you their exact cost for the item and the precise profit they're adding on top. The whole deal is built on this foundation of total, upfront honesty. This shows the process perfectly. Let's just walk through it. First, you, the customer, go to the bank and say, "I'd like to buy that car." Then, and this is the most important part, the bank goes out and actually buys the car. They take real, legal ownership of it. Only then, in step 3, do they sell it to you at the price you both agreed on, their cost plus their profit. Then you just pay that total price back over time. See? It's a sale, not a loan.
Okay, so that works great for buying something that's already sitting on a lot. But what about financing something that hasn't been built yet? Like a house that's just a blueprint or a specialized machine for a factory. For that, we're going to need a different tool from the toolkit.
And this slide just lays out the difference perfectly. Murabaha is for the here and now, the finished product. Istisna, our next contract, is for the yet to be, the thing that still needs to be made or built.
So istisna is basically a commissioning contract. And again, notice the language. It's not a loan for a project. You're actually entering into a binding agreement to purchase a specific thing that will be custom-made for you based on a clear set of specs.
And the applications for this are massive. We're not talking about small stuff. Istisna is the contract that's used to finance huge projects, from building entire housing communities and factories to constructing giant infrastructure projects like bridges or even airplanes.
So, you've got these fairly straightforward contracts for buying and selling, but we all know the financial world is a lot more complex than that. Sometimes a business just needs cash flow, and this is where things can get a little more debated.
And it's so important to remember this isn't some dusty, static set of rules. It is an active, modern field. You have financial experts and religious scholars who are constantly debating how to apply these core principles to the tricky, complex problems of today's global economy.
Okay, let's look at a more complicated one called Tawarruk.
Its whole purpose is to get cash into a customer's hands. So here's how it works. First, the customer buys a commodity. Let's say it's a ton of aluminum, from the bank, but on credit. Then, in almost the same breath, the customer asks the bank to immediately sell that exact same aluminum on the market for cash. The customer gets the cash right away, but they now owe the bank the original, slightly higher price of the aluminum, which they pay back over time.
So the debate here really comes down to form versus substance. Critics look at it and say, come on, even though there's a real commodity being bought and sold, the only reason for the transaction is to create what is basically a cash loan with a markup. They argue it's just too similar to an interest-based loan. But proponents say, hey, it's a series of legitimate sales that follows all the rules of trade. And that's a really deep and ongoing discussion in the industry.
So as we start to wrap this up, let's just quickly hit the big ideas. First, the whole system is built on this core principle. You finance things through the trade of real assets, not by lending money for interest. Second, this leads to contracts like murabaha, which are built on a bedrock of transparency and disclosed profit. Third, the toolkit is super versatile, with different tools for stuff that exists now and stuff that needs to be built tomorrow. And finally, just remember, this is a living, breathing system full of active and really interesting debate.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. As this global conversation about finding more ethical and transparent ways to do finance gets louder and louder, what lessons can we learn from a system that, from its very DNA, insists on linking every single dollar of finance to real, tangible economic activity? It's definitely a question worth thinking about.